Hi, today I'm going to talk about troubleshooting rainwater runoff and standing water you might have on your property. So I recently got a text. The place where my kids go to karate texted and said they had to cancel class because there was water that was running off, and they sent a video. I'll show you right here. The water was just running off in sheets, and there was no way people could possibly drive in and be able to get into the building. So that's not the first time. So I reached out to them and I said, hey, maybe we should talk, because what I do on a daily basis is work with problems like this, right? So they agreed, let's meet. They, were open to hearing what I could do to possibly help them. And it turned out there was a couple of things. First of all, they thought the problem was that they had a layer of caliche, which is a super compacted sediment layer that acts kind of like cement, and it really can act like that if you're trying to break through it when you're planting something. But what I found when I did the research was it was more likely that probably about 3/4, if not more, of their property was sitting on 45% content soil, which is pretty high. It's not impossible, and that's why for the majority of rains, they don't have a problem. But when you get these heavy rains that are dumping a lot of water at one time, and the water doesn't have anywhere to go, so it's just coming right off the building, there was nothing catching it or directing it, aside from just grading. There is grading, I should say. Then clay actually forms platelets, and that's why it's so great for vessels and plates and all of those things, right? Because it can actually form platelets that overlap and seal very well, especially if it's wet. Clay can actually swell up, and then it can actually hold water really well, which is why if you're building a pond, you're going to line it with clay, because yes, there's still going to be infiltration. Water is still going to get through, but it's a very, very good layer to be able to hold water in one place. So you can see why with a heavy rain, it's just going to act like it might as well have been a paved surface. So I put some recommendations together, and I went and I met with them again, because I visited probably the next day, I think is when I got out there. But I talked through what all I had put together, and I had a few recommendations. The first one was install rain gutters. It's a no-brainer. It helps catch all the rainwater that's coming down and allows you to direct it to somewhere that you can actually deal with it in a better way, right? They didn't have rain gutters on there, and I don't think they realized how much rain would hit in even a 1-inch rain event. That's a pretty heavy rain event, and it's a fairly decent building size, and they were just letting it flow off. So first step, rain gutters. Now the second step was figuring out where to send this water. What do we do with it so we don't have standing water that they're going to drive through and make a mess of all the nice, grading and surfacing and all of the stuff that they have? Now, there were ideas that had been tossed around to put in a French drain, and I had turned that idea down because for this particular situation, where the soil was high clay content, they would have had to dig a pretty long French drain to get that water to go somewhere that it could drain off. So that, and French drains, you have to maintain them. You have to go back in and make sure that it's not going to get silted. So not a good idea for their situation. It's a lot of back-breaking work. They were going to do the digging themselves, and I just said no. That best thing to do, rain gutters, direct the rain to one of 3 places. So they do next door have a water catchment area that they could direct it to, but it also is where they have the high clay soil. And you know what, if it's there and it's in, rainwater can be stored there, that's fine. The problem that I saw was they would have to dig under the wall, and I was concerned that that water could actually come back on them and they could actually get more water than what they have. So those are things to consider. The other thing is they could direct it to an area of their property that was right still off of one corner of the building that actually had like 15% less clay and seemed to be absorbing just fine. The property next to them, you could see exactly where they had the two different types of soils. As I was driving by, it's a big empty lot that's owned by somebody else. And the part of it that was on the high clay soil was literally a lake for a couple of days. And then the more northern area of it was completely dry, no problem draining. So I told them, one corner of the building would probably make logical sense. They could probably do more if they wanted. They could direct that water there. The other thing I suggested was rain gardens. So rain gardens can be done in innumerable shapes, sizes, and you can vegetate them in untold ways, right? The whole point is that you would get vegetation, rocks, stuff in there to help, and then you would have a gentle slope coming in. You want to slow down the water and give it a chance to infiltrate. Now that the plants, a tree, at least one tree, if not more, all of those things have roots going down and they help the water to infiltrate. Now getting organic matter acts like if you build that up, that acts like a sponge. That's another thing that the SoilWeb showed. Not a lot of organic matter. So if they can build up the organic matter, they'll have more of a sponge, get plants in there to help give avenues for the water to get down into the soil deeper. Plus, right? And then it's a basin, a rainwater garden is a basin. Now, when I was in Delaware, they had a rainwater garden and it was a great idea. It drained right into their stormwater system. So they still had all the plants that they could water and would help infiltrate into that particular plot of area right off the sidewalk. But ultimately, the extra water didn't go out in the street and flood the street. It didn't go down the sidewalk. It went straight into their stormwater drain, which I'm assuming because we were right there. I want to say that was Chesapeake Bay. I'm terrible about geography like that. It would just go right out there to the bay. Okay, so they had the perfect opportunity down the side of their property that they didn't even have to dig the rain garden. They just had to form the basins. They already had trees in place. They were full grown and mature. All they would have to do is form the basins, put some rocks to support it, and then put some plants, some grasses that actually form lots of roots and will help the water infiltrate. Like I said, some shrubs, and they just already had a great place for that to happen. They could direct water there. They had place on the other side of the building that was also had a full-grown tree that would be a great place to put another rain garden. They wouldn't even have to clear out much of their stuff. They would just have to really just form the rain garden and it would be out of the way. So those were those two suggestions. Now, the last one that I suggested is more of a long-term solution, and it's something that they wanted to look into, not just for that building, but for their own personal ideas as well, for their own home. And that was putting in a rain tank. Now, a rain tank, you can do a wet system or a dry system. And in this case, because the cars go all the way around the building, a dry system didn't make sense. You would have a tank right there, catching the water right next to the building, and that would possibly get damaged or cut off traffic, or it made more sense to them, and this is what I recommended, is putting a wet system, which would go down into the ground and you could direct the piping somewhere, anywhere, where it was more convenient to store a rain tank. And then the rain can be used for watering the plants that you just put in your rain gardens. It can be used for flushing the toilets, or it can be used for cleaning the place, because I'm sure there's a lot of cleaning that happens. As a matter of fact, I know there is for that particular facility. So there's lots of uses for the rainwater, and I don't suggest putting in a rain tank if you don't have the use for it. If you're just putting it in to store it and it's just going to sit there and do nothing. I mean, so there is another case, right? You could store it for when it's drier and then be able to release it at a more manageable rate. There is that. So I don't want to discount it and say there's no other reason. There is this like safety reason, right? Get the rain to a place where it's not going to disrupt business, and then later on be able to release it at a slower rate, maybe when you're not holding classes or you're not open for business. There you go. So I hope this was helpful to you. If you have questions or if you need help for your situation, I'd love to hear from you. You can post in the comments, you can send me a message. So I want to give you an example, and I want to give you your own house or business as an example, right? If you want to know how much water comes off your own roof, then what you want to do is you want to just take a Google Maps or whatever your Maps program is, just that bird's eye view, and you're going to measure the square footage. So your length times your width, and that's your square feet. And you're going to take your square footage and you're going to multiply it by 1 and divide by 12. So you're converting this, you're taking it into cubic feet, and you're saying a 1 inch of rain, that's that 1/12 that I just had you. So you take your square feet, multiply it times 1, divide it by 12, and now you have your cubic feet of rain that would hit your roof if you had a 1 inch rain. Bear with me, okay? So now we're going to multiply it by what's called the runoff coefficient. So this is like, we're estimating how much of that we think actually runs off. Now, whether the rest of it evaporates or goes some other direction, it's just an estimate. So for a roof, we typically use 0.9. So we take that number and let's just call it 1,000. You would multiply it by 0.9 and you would end up with 900. And then we've got 900 cubic feet and we want to know gallons. So to convert it to gallons, you're going to multiply it by 7.48. I hope this isn't, like if you're having a hard time, rewind, just take it step by step. 7.48. So that will give you how many gallons comes off of your roof in a 1 inch rain event. That number is so important because it lets you multiply for over a year's time, and it lets you divide it up for if you had less than an inch, but it's just such a solid square number to have in your pocket for whenever you're trying to figure things out. I hope that really helps you right there. Get a really good idea of what's coming off your roof. All right, let's get back to it. But absolutely, I thought when I saw this happening and I wanted to be able to help them out, I thought this could possibly help a lot more people. So I hope it did. And if it did, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like and subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. All right, have a great one.